After the Spanish-American War, the United States continued to expand outside of the continental U.S. Now that the war with Spain was over and the war of the Philippines was over, the United States needed to figure out what to do with all of the land that they have acquired from these wars. So in 1902, the United States is going to pass the Philippine Government Act, which is going to declare that the Filipino Islands are an unorganized territory of the United States and that they would not be eligible for statehood. In 1917, the United States Congress is going to pass the Jones Act, which will make it so the United States will give the Philippines their freedom. However, the act does not state when this freedom will be given. And the United States does not give the Philippines their freedom until after World War II is over in 1946. As for Puerto Rico, which was gained by the Spanish-American War, the United States is going to use the island as a guarding post to the Caribbean Sea. And the U.S. passes the Faulkner Act on April 12, 1900. And this is going to create a government for Puerto Rico. It's going to create duties on imports coming into the United States from Puerto Rico. So duties are like a tax that is applied to any goods that are coming from Puerto Rico to the United States. The 1917 Jones Act is going to give Puerto Rico full territorial status. So Puerto Ricans are considered U.S. citizens. However, they cannot vote in U.S. presidential elections. Puerto Ricans can elect their own legislators and governor these individuals can enforce local laws on the island. The other island that the United States now must figure out what to do with is Cuba. So in 1900, the Cubans are going to draft their own constitution that they're going to model after the United States Constitution. U.S. Congress is going to pass the Platt Amendment in 1901. And what this amendment entails is that Cuba is not going to be allowed to enter any agreements with foreign powers. So they can't create any other treaties or agreements with foreign nations besides the United States. The United States was going to be allowed to intervene in Cuban affairs. So if we felt that an individual came in power in the government that had too much control or they didn't agree with them, the United States had the power to intervene in that. Cuba needed to lease Guantanamo Bay to the United States for a naval station. We still lease this today. And Cuba was not going to be allowed to build up an excessive public debt, so they couldn't take out loans in order to fund the government within the country. Another area in the world that the United States is going to get involved in is China. And many European nations had already been involved in China well before the 1900s. By the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, countries like Russia, Germany, France, and Great Britain had already taken chunks of China where they had developed an influence over, and they took control of these regions. And were using China mostly for trade. So in 1898 and 1899, Britain is going to ask the United States to join them to prevent other nations from taking over China. The United States actually refuses. They want to have their own control and their own involvement with China. So what the United States is going to do is they're going to develop what's called an open door policy. This open door policy with China was going to be established by the U.S. Secretary of State, John Hay. And what the open door policy states is that all nations should have equal access to trade in China. So we shouldn't close off trade to any one nation. This guaranteed that China would not be taken over by only one foreign power, so one nation wouldn't have more control than another. And it also made it so that the United States could get involved with businesses with China. The United States had a desire to exploit and dominate Chinese markets and take advantage of the goods that were available within China and the natural resources. The Chinese, however, were not everyone was happy about what was happening with foreign nations coming in and taking control. So in 1900, Chinese nationalists, which in the West, in the United States, we called them boxers, they were deciding to rebel against foreign involvement in China. So what they did was they attacked foreign embassies in the city of Beijing. And the United States, Germany, Britain, Russia, and Japan all had to send troops to China to stop the Boxer Rebellion. So they are going to be successful at stopping this rebellion. And U.S. continues to have power within China. To understand more about foreign relations that happen in the United States in the early 1900s, we have to understand the individuals who are in power within the presidency. So President William McKinley, he's going to be shot and killed in September 1901. He's going to be shot at the American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, and he's shot twice. One bullet is going to hit his coat button and the other is going to be lodged into his back, and he's going to survive for an entire week until he dies. The vice president at the time was Theodore Roosevelt, who had come to fame during the Spanish-American War, and he's going to become president. He's the youngest man to be president. He's only 42 years old at the time. So a little bit of background on Theodore Roosevelt. His nickname was Teddy. He grew up very wealthy in New York City. Some other positions that he held before becoming vice president, he served as the Civil Service Commissioner. He also served as the New York City Police Commissioner. Like I mentioned before, he became famous during the Spanish-American War as a member of the Rough Riders. And Theodore Roosevelt's main argument was that the United States had to conquer other regions in the world to bring law and order and righteousness to backwards peoples. So he is going to try to take control, especially within several Central American and South American countries. And one area that he is very concerned about during his presidency is the area of Panama. And the idea of creating a canal across Panama had been something that was in the works for several years. If a canal was added across Panama, it would cut the distance of travel from New York City to San Francisco by 8,000 miles. So goods that are being shipped across the country could be shipped much quicker, and it would make travel much quicker between the two regions if a canal was created on this portion of Panama that was really the thinnest portion of land in the Western Hemisphere. And a canal had been tried to be built for several years, and one of the issues was who controlled the region. So back in the 1800s, there was a treaty called the Bidlack Treaty, and this treaty is going to guarantee that the country of Colombia had control over Panama. And so anyone that wanted to negotiate to build the Panama Canal was going to have to negotiate with Colombia at the time. Another treaty that was created was the Clayton-Buller Treaty, and this treaty was the British agreed to acquire no more territory in Central America, and that they wanted to join up with the United States to build the Panama Canal. The United States is going to create the Hay-Pickford Treaty, in which they're going to ask Britain for consent to build a canal on their own. They don't want to build it with Great Britain. The United States wants to do it on their own. All this is good, but it all depends on who has control of Panama at the time. At the beginning of the 1900s, a third of the Panama Canal had already been completed. A French company was already building it, and they'd already spent $300 million on it. So the French company offers the United States to purchase the land that they had been working on that is actually owned by Colombia. That doesn't make any sense because the French don't own the land, so why would the United States pay them? It makes sense that they would pay Colombia. So the United States offers Colombia $10 million for this canal zone, which is 51 miles long and 16 miles wide. It's a very small amount of land, and $10 million at the time was a good amount of money for it. Colombia, however, counteroffers the United States and says you need to pay $25 million if you want to build the canal and purchase this land. The United States decides we're not going to pay that much, and they decide to support Panama in revolting against Colombia. So the United States provides aid to Panama. We're going to help them successfully gain their freedom from Colombia, and they'll become their own nation. As part of this, the United States agrees to give Panama $10 million as a down payment for the land where they want to build the Panama Canal. In addition to that, the United States will pay a lease fee every year that they occupy the canal zone, and they'll give Panama $250,000 a year. The canal zone now is going to be 51 miles long, and instead of 6 miles wide, 10 miles wide. The United States actually eventually gives Panama back the canal in the year 2000, but up until the year 2000, U.S. had control of this region, just where the canal is, though. So it takes 10 years to finish building the canal. It officially opens on August 15th, 1914. 60,000 workers are going to be used to create this canal. They use dynamite and steam shovels to gouge out the canal. And a third of the workers that work on this project are going to die during the process of creating the canal because of disease in the region. Another thing that Roosevelt does while he's president is he tries to take more control of Latin America. So he creates this document called the Roosevelt Corollary, and it's an addition to what was called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine had been written back in the 1800s, and what the Monroe Doctrine stated was that the United States was not going to allow any foreign nations to come into North or South America. If they did, it would be seen as a threat, and that basically foreign nations should mind their own business and stay out of this section of the world. So what Roosevelt is adding to this is basically, the United States had the right to intervene in any country in the Western Hemisphere that did things harmful to the United States, or if the threat of intervention by countries outside of the hemisphere was present. So many of the Latin American countries at the time had a lot of foreign debt that they owed. One country in particular was the Dominican Republic. The government went bankrupt in 1904. And European countries were threatening to intervene militarily in the nation to collect their money. And that's one of the reasons why Roosevelt issues this document. He's letting other nations know that if you come here to the Western Hemisphere and you try to threaten peace within the region, the United States had the right to stop you, because it would be seen as harmful to the United States. So this political cartoon is really showing Roosevelt as this really powerful guy that is letting other nations know, don't come around here. Even if countries do owe you money, we're not going to let any wars or anything happen within our region. So a saying that is connected with Roosevelt is speak softly and carry a big stick. So he's nicely telling these nations to basically mind their own business, stay out of the region, and as long as you do that, everything will be fine. But if you decide to intervene and come to our region, we will fight you. We will push you out. Another show of power that Roosevelt does is the Great White Fleet. So in 1907, he is going to send all of the American warships on a 14-month world tour to show off the United States power. This world tour is going to consist of 18 battleships, 8 armored cruisers, and other support ships. And they travel the entire world. So they go all the ways down the Atlantic coast, through South America. They go up the Pacific coast, through Hawaii, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, China, Philippines, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. And then they come home. And they are greeted with admiration. People do come out to come see them, and it's really showing off American power, that other nations should not forget about the United States, that we have power, we're willing to fight, and leave us alone. The president that comes into power after Roosevelt is President William Howard Taft, and he is also going to promote U.S. interests overseas. He's going to help American companies and banks invest in foreign countries. So U.S. companies and banks are going to start investing in East Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And Taft announces that he would intervene in nations that were experiencing political and economic turmoil, especially if U.S. businesses were invested there. And one area that Taft is going to get involved with is Nicaragua. So in 1909, Taft is going to send the U.S. Marines to support a revolution that was taking place in Nicaragua. The U.S. Secretary of State, Philander Knox, is going to help U.S. banks negotiate loans to help prop up a new government that the United States had put in place within the country. In 1911, Taft is going to send U.S. troops to restore political stability within the nation, and the U.S. troops are going to stay in Nicaragua for over 10 years. So what the United States is doing is they're picking and choosing which countries they want to get involved with, and they're choosing who's going to be in charge of that government. They're handpicking who is going to be in charge and what type of government is going to be there, so that U.S. companies and banks could take advantage of those nations.